The Great Property Scam: How Criminals Are Selling Homes They Don't Own. On a rainy morning in North London, Sarah Mitchell unlocked her front door to find a stranger standing on the steps with a van full of furniture. "I'm moving in," the man said matter-of-factly, holding out a sheaf of papers that appeared to show he had just purchased the 3-bedroom terrace. Sarah froze. "That's impossible," she replied. "This is my house. I've lived here for 12 years. But as the two compared documents, panic set in. The stranger's paperwork bore her address, her postcode, and even her name, except, according to the files, she had already sold the house weeks earlier. Someone somewhere had stolen her identity and sold her home out from under her nose. "I thought it was a prank at first," Sarah says now. "Then I realised I was in the middle of a nightmare, the new face of property fraud." Sarah is one of a growing number of victims in a wave of property scams sweeping the UK housing market. With values rising and homes in high demand, criminals have identified a lucrative target: selling or letting homes they do not own. These scams range from bogus landlords collecting deposits for non-existent rentals, to forged title deeds, and even full-scale sales of occupied houses through legitimate-seeming solicitors. In 2024 alone, the Land Registry flagged more than 100 suspected fraudulent transactions, while the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau warned that the true figure could be far higher, as many cases go unreported until it's too late. "It's one of the most devastating types of fraud we deal with," says Detective Inspector Mark Halstead of the Metropolitan Police's Economic Crime Unit. "Victims can literally wake up one day to find someone else claiming legal ownership of their home. The emotional and financial toll is enormous." How the scam works. The scams rely on a combination of identity theft, gaps in the conveyancing system, and public trust in official documents. In Sarah's case, criminals obtain copies of her personal details, likely through phishing emails and leaked data from old financial accounts. Using those, they created forged documents and posed as her, instructing a solicitor to handle the sale of the house. The transaction was pushed through quickly, with the buyer transferring funds into an account controlled by the fraudsters. "By the time we realised what had happened, the money was gone," Sarah recalls. "I was lucky I didn't lose the house itself, but for weeks I had no idea whether the Land Registry would recognise me as the true owner." Experts say the scams often target mortgage-free homes, which are easier to sell without lender checks. Elderly homeowners, people living abroad, and those with rental or second properties are particularly vulnerable. "Fraudsters know where the loopholes are," says Paula Higgins of the Homeowners Alliance. "They look for properties that are high value, unencumbered, and where the owner might not notice paperwork being intercepted. It's chilling how professional some of these operations are. Victims left in limbo. For victims, the ordeal doesn't end once the fraud is uncovered. The legal wrangling can last months or even years, while the psychological scars linger much longer. Take the case of John and Meena Patel in Birmingham. They discovered their buy-to-let flat had been sold to a bogus investor when tenants called to say a new landlord had turned up demanding rent. "We couldn't believe it," John says. "We had tenants in the flat, contracts signed, everything in place, and yet somehow someone had forged our signatures and transferred the property. It shook us to the core. We kept asking, if this can happen once, what's to stop it happening again?" Many victims also feel abandoned by the system. While the Land Registry does have safeguards, such as its property alert service and the ability to place restrictions on title deeds, these are optional, and relatively few homeowners sign up. Compensation is sometimes available, but the process can be slow and complex. For Sarah Mitchell, the trauma was personal. "It made me feel violated," she says. "Someone literally tried to erase me from my own home. Even now when the doorbell rings, I feel a jolt of panic. I wonder if it's another fake owner, another piece of bad news." The Great Property Scam: How Criminals Are Selling Homes They Don't Own. If victims are often left bewildered by how such fraud is possible, the criminals behind these scams operate with chilling precision. Interviews with investigators and housing experts reveal that the modern property scammer is no longer just a lone con artist with forged papers, but part of a network that blends cybercrime, money laundering, and old-fashioned confidence tricks. The anatomy of a housing scam. Fraudsters typically begin by harvesting personal information. Leaked data from previous cyber breaches, stolen mail, or even public social media accounts provide them with enough fragments to impersonate a homeowner. Once they have a target, the scammers create convincing documents, ID cards, utility bills, even forged signatures to pass basic checks. But the real sophistication comes in the use of complicit professionals. Police say some scammers recruit or bribe rogue solicitors, estate agents, or notaries to smooth the transaction. Others set up entirely fake law firms online, complete with cloned websites and phone numbers. Conveyancing is still very trust-based, explains Dr. Fiona Walters, a property law lecturer at King's College London. If you see a solicitor's letterhead and hear a professional voice on the phone, you rarely question it. Criminals exploit that trust. Big money, small risk, the rewards are vast. In one recent case under investigation in Manchester, fraudsters attempted to sell a vacant 1.2 million townhouse using forged documents. The buyer transferred a deposit of £100,000 before the scam collapsed. The funds were whisked through a series of overseas accounts, making recovery almost impossible. Property fraud has one of the best profit-to-risk ratios in organised crime, says Detective Inspector Halstead. Drugs and weapons attract heavy policing, but forged deeds? Most local police stations don't have the resources or expertise to deal with them. Unlike traditional burglaries, which yield quick but small gains, a single successful property scam can net criminals hundreds of thousands of pounds. Even failed attempts often generate profits through deposits and upfront fees. Who are the scammers? Contrary to the stereotype of shadowy mafias, many scams are run by relatively small groups, sometimes even individuals with IT skills. In some cases, they're ex-estate agents or paralegals who know the system's weaknesses. A convicted fraudster, he claims he made more than £300,000 in 2 years by posing as a landlord for properties listed on Zoopla and Rightmove. It was easy money, he boasts. You take photos from online listings, post them as your own, and ask for deposits. Students and young professionals are desperate to move in quickly, so they don't ask too many questions. By the time they realise there's no flat, you've already withdrawn the cash. Martin says he stopped after being caught in a sting, but he believes hundreds of others are still running the same playbook today. It's not rocket science. As long as the market is this competitive, people will cut corners and scammers will step in. The human cost. For those caught in the middle, the damage goes far beyond lost savings. Victims describe the scams as psychologically brutal, eroding their trust in one of life's most fundamental institutions, the security of a home. In Bristol, 27-year-old graduate nurse Amelia Clark lost £2,800 to a fake landlord who promised her a flat near the hospital where she works. She wired the money as a deposit, only to find the landlord uncontactable and the flat already occupied. I cried for days, she says. I'd saved for over a year. Suddenly I was sofa surfing and commuting 3 hours to work. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling that I'd been completely fooled. Charities say younger renters are especially vulnerable, with scams often targeting first-time movers and international students unfamiliar with UK processes. A perfect storm. Experts point to a perfect storm of factors making the UK ripe for property fraud. Soaring prices, high demand, and an overloaded legal system. Transactions are rushed, checks are minimal, and everyone is desperate to get deals done, says Paula Higgins. That creates an environment where scammers thrive. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the trend as more transactions moved online. When you're doing ID checks over Zoom instead of in person, it's easier to slip fake documents through, Higgins adds. And while tech is part of the problem, it also makes scams easier to scale. Fraudsters can send hundreds of fake rental listings with little effort, reeling in multiple victims at once. Cracks in the system. Critics say regulators have been slow to react. The Solicitors Regulation Authority admits it receives regular reports of firms being cloned, but resources are limited. Meanwhile, the Land Registry acknowledges that while its systems are strong, they cannot guarantee 100% security. Fraudsters only need one weak link, says Dr. Walters. The system is like a chain. If one solicitor or one ID check fails, the whole process collapses. For the criminals, this makes property fraud one of the most attractive scams in the UK today. For homeowners and tenants, it makes every knock on the door and every signature a potential risk. The Great Property Scam: How Criminals Are Selling Homes They Don't Own. Part 3, Policing the Shadows. When Sarah Mitchell discovered someone had tried to sell her home, her first call was to the police. She was met with polite sympathy, but also an uncomfortable reality. They told me straight away that these cases are complicated and that I probably need to go through the land registry and maybe even hire a solicitor, she recalls. I thought, isn't this what the police are for? But they were basically saying, don't expect a quick result. Sarah's experience is far from unusual, the limits of policing. Across the UK, frontline officers admit property fraud is among the hardest crimes to investigate. The fraud often spans jurisdictions. Forged documents may be produced in one city, money funneled through another, and accounts emptied overseas within hours. By the time the victim realises what's happened, the criminals are long gone, says D.I. Halstead. The funds might have been laundered through 5 different countries. Tracking it back is like chasing smoke. Even when perpetrators are caught, prosecutions are rare and lengthy. According to figures obtained under a Freedom of Information request, fewer than 1 in 10 reported property fraud cases result in criminal charges. A patchwork of responsibility. Part of the problem is that responsibility is split across multiple agencies. Police investigate fraud, the Land Registry oversees property titles, solicitors regulate conveyancing, and trading standards may get involved if estate agents are complicit. It's a fragmented system, says Baroness Judith Reed, a crossbench peer who has raised the issue in the House of Lords. Homeowners fall between the cracks because no single body takes ownership of the problem. Everyone agrees it's serious, but no one has the resources to fix it. The Land Registry points to its indemnity fund, which can compensate victims of fraud if they lose ownership. But compensation claims are often slow and contested. They'll cover financial loss, yes, says solicitor Adrian Blackwood, who has represented multiple victims. But what about the emotional damage? What about the months of uncertainty when you don't know if you still own your home? The system doesn't recognise that trauma. When the law lags behind, critics argue that legislation has not kept pace with modern fraud tactics. The Land Registration Act of 2002 was designed to simplify property transactions, but some say it inadvertently opened new loopholes. In the name of efficiency, we created a system that criminals can exploit, says Dr. Walters. Digital conveyancing is faster, but it also allows forged identities to slip through unnoticed. We haven't built the digital safeguards to match the risks. A case in Luton in 2021 illustrated the weakness starkly. A fraudster impersonated the homeowner, instructed solicitors, and successfully transferred ownership of a semi-detached house. The real owner only discovered the fraud when bailiffs arrived. It took nearly 2 years for the courts to restore their title. Government promises, slow progress. In recent years, ministers have promised action. The Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities has pledged to strengthen identity checks and encourage greater use of the Land Registry's Property Alert Service. But uptake remains low. Fewer than 500,000 homeowners have signed up out of more than 29 million properties in England and Wales. It's not well advertised and people assume it won't happen to them, says Higgins of the Homeowners Alliance.